John has always believed in people. Throughout his life, he has learned many things: how to work hard, how to build relationships, how to survive in a world that sometimes seems too cruel. But as he reached old age, he realized that not all challenges can be overcome alone. As he retired from active life, he felt increasingly isolated and needed help. And so began his story with Anna, a caregiver who seemed to be what he had been missing for so long: a support, a friend, and a caring presence. Anna appeared when John already felt that his strength was not what it used to be. It was hard for him to cope with household chores: cleaning, shopping, cooking. His legs were getting weaker, and his heart could no longer withstand the constant stress. And here she was, or a young woman, pleasant to look at, with a kind smile and gentle hands that would help him feel more comfortable in his own home. Anna was a professional in her field. John noticed that she had experience working with the elderly and knew exactly how to take care of her clients. She came every morning, prepared breakfast for him, helped him get dressed and go for a walk, and John felt safe in her presence, and that was important to him. In the first weeks, everything was perfect. John, although not rich, had enough to provide him with a quiet life. His pension, although small, allowed him to live without too much worry, and this calm routine began to feel secure to him. Anna became more and more a part of his life, starting with simple but important tasks: serving him a cup of tea, picking up his medication, supporting him in conversation. John couldn't help but notice how much it was changing his life. And it seemed that he had found the one he was looking for. One evening, when they were sitting in the dining room talking about various things, John, feeling a certain closeness to Anna, started talking about his finances. He was frank and always tried to be honest in his dealings. He told her that he kept a portion of his savings in bank accounts in case of unexpected expenses. It was a small amount, but it was important to John. He wanted someone to know about it to make him feel safer. Anna listened attentively, nodding as if to support him. She didn't seem interested in the money, but John couldn't help but notice her tense up slightly when he mentioned his finances. It was a single, perhaps insignificant detail that left a mark on his mind. But at the time, it was just a random moment in their conversation, nothing more. Anna often said that she was here not only to help him physically, but also to make him feel comfortable psychologically. She said that it was important not only to take care of a person, but also to become his friend. John felt that he was not alone. She really knew how to calm him down, distract from his worries, and help him forget about the difficulties of old age. Their relationship was a strange one, between trust and professionalism, but John felt he could rely on her. Her words were comforting and her actions were unquestionable. He couldn't imagine that someone who cared so much about him could do anything bad. After a few months of Anna being a part of his life, John began to feel that he could afford not only physical care, but also emotional support. She was no longer just a caregiver, she became his close friend. As she talked about her family, about the small joys of life, and John felt that her words had a piece of his soul in them. Yes, he was old and could not see life with the same eyes as in his youth, but it seemed that everything in his world was beginning to take on color again. The feeling that there was someone he could trust was important to him. He felt that he was in good hands, that perhaps even in old age could have something worth loving and caring for. But as often happens, things are not what they seem at first glance. And this hope for stability and peace, for complete trust that he put in Anna's hands, had many darker sides that he could not have foreseen. Soon he would realize that what he had believed for so long was only temporary, and the real test was about to begin. John woke up early in the morning, but this time something was not right. Usually he woke up feeling light, but today he felt like something was wrong in the room. He could not understand why. All these years of living alone, it was hard for him to even think about letting someone else into his life. But now, when he started to depend on Anna, he began to feel some kind of inexplicable discomfort. Anna was always attentive. She brought him breakfast, gave him his medication on time, checked to see if he was okay. But today she was different. Her gaze was not as open as before, and there was a shadow of anxiety on her face. John could not understand what exactly was bothering him, but he felt that something had changed. Maybe it's just old age. He thought as he sat at the table. It was hard for him to understand whether something was really wrong or whether his old fears were just starting to take over. But something in Anna's eyes left him feeling uneasy. Over the next few days, John began to notice even more changes. Anna became less approachable, as if she were focused on something else. She was spending more and more time on the phone, where John couldn't hear a word she was saying. As she tried to hide it, but John was not deaf to the changes in the behavior of the people around him. Maybe it's just a work thing. Maybe she's having a hard time. He wondered, but every day these small changes became more and more obvious. Her smile was not as sincere, and her eyes were colder. And it was alarming. And then, one evening, John couldn't stand it any longer and asked her directly, "Anna, is everything okay? You look a little worried." Anna sighed and looked at him. She could have reacted immediately to dispel his doubts, but she didn't. She held her gaze for a moment, and John noticed her hands rubbing nervously at her napkin. "It's okay, John, just a little something to do." "It's nothing." But her words did not convince him. John could sense that something important was bothering her, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was true. Or was it just something external, or maybe his subconscious was creating these anxieties? A few days later, the situation became even more tense. John learned that Anna had started to change her routine. She no longer stayed with him until the evening as she used to. She was busy making phone calls that she tried to hide from him. John was not blind, and even though he was not young, he began to notice that something was missing. He began to feel more and more that there was something he didn't understand. Something that indicated that his situation might not be what he had imagined. And it made him feel helpless. Anna would come in and try to be the same caring person she used to be, but something in her behavior changed. She was less willing to do what John asked, and spent more and more time in the room while he was alone. And then, in his mind, questions began to arising. What's going on? Why has she changed? Can I really trust her? We all know how hard it can be to trust people, especially when old age takes away your sense of confidence. And John began to ask himself more and more if this connection with Anna was really so innocent. Maybe it was just stress and the inventions of his aging mind, or maybe he had reasons to be worried. And then, one night, John decided to act. He decided to follow Anna. He clearly realized that his actions could change everything, but he could no longer bear this feeling of uncertainty. He was scared, but he felt that this was his only chance to find out the truth. That night, he quietly got out of bed, took his wand, and left the room. In the darkness of the house, he followed her quietly, trying not to be seen. His heart was beating faster, and he felt fear take over. But it was all because he couldn't afford to leave things to chance. John slipped quietly down the hallway, studying every step to avoid making noise. It seemed that the silence of the house had become oppressive, even frightening. Today he had to decide whether he could still trust the person who had been his only assistant for the past few years, Anna. She had already changed her habits several times, and it was alarming when during the last few nights, when John tried to close his eyes again, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had become a stranger in his own home. What if Anna hadn't just become busy? What if she was hiding something? John had to be sure of his suspicion, and now was his chance to find out the truth. Anna was in her room, and as usual, everything was quiet. John held his breath as he approached the door, careful not to attract attention. He looked through the gap that remained between the door and the floor. There was light in the room, but not so bright as to create the effect of bright light. Only a faint outline of a shadow on the wall. But it all looked more like a thunderstorm gathering on the horizon. His eyes sharpened, and he tried to see everything that was happening inside. Anna was sitting at the table, her face focused. She was holding her phone, but for some reason she didn't look up from the screen. John couldn't make out what she was doing, but her expression gave away something suspicious. He could hear Anna repeatedly typing something and looking at messages, but there was something about her behavior that worried him. All her movements were quick, nervous, and there was this look in her eyes that didn't answer the questions that remained in John's mind. Just the way she held the phone, still with trembling fingers, gave off some invisible tension. John leaned over to get a better look. His heart was beating faster, and he felt that this was not just intuition, but something more. She leaned toward the table, and John realized that her actions were different than before. It seemed like she was hiding something important, and that look was too nervous. Her fingers never stopped trembling. He could almost hear her breathing, even when she wasn't moving. What was she hiding? And then, a few seconds later, Anna raised the phone to her ear. John couldn't hear the words, but the meaning was obvious. She was waiting for someone, and it was probably not just a conversation. He stepped back quietly, afraid she might notice him. He didn't want her to suspect that he was following her, but at the same time, he was excruciatingly curious to know if it was what he thought it was. What was she hiding from him? What was really going on in that house? The next day, John still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with him. Every time Anna came into the room, he felt her presence change. There was something in her voice, in her eyes. She became less open, more focused on her business. John could not understand if it was just his old age or if her behavior had really changed that much. But he felt that he couldn't just ignore his suspicions. Meanwhile, Anna continued to fulfill her duties, but every gesture she made seemed different to John. Glances, broken conversations, as if she was constantly hiding something. At Anna, he began to feel that it was more than just the usual mood swings. His heart grew heavy with the thought that maybe Anna was not as kind and reliable as she had seemed at first. One evening, John couldn't stand it any longer and decided to talk to Anna. She was in her usual mood, but her face did not have the open expression that had before. He sat down next to her and looked her in the eye. Anna, I want to ask you a question, John said, trying to remain calm. I notice that you have changed somehow lately. Maybe it's just getting older, but I can't help but notice that you don't look the same as you used to. And Anna looked at him, and, as if a little embarrassed, replied, John, everything is fine. I just have a lot on my plate. I have a life too, and I can't always be around. She added this unemotionally, and it made John suspicious again. It was hard for him to imagine that she was really that inconsiderate to him, to the way he was feeling. John tried to pretend to believe her, but everything inside of him screamed that there was more to it than what she was telling him. He didn't know what would happen next, but now it seemed to him that finding the truth was a matter of honor. Would he be able to find out who was behind this change in Anya and what she was really hiding? Should he continue to trust his caregiver, or was it time to do something drastic? John sat at the kitchen table, losing all the calmness he had been accustomed to. He kept thinking about the recent events, and with each new step he took, it seemed like he was making things worse. Anna, his trusted caregiver, had begun to change her behavior, and now John realized that he might lose more than just his trust. What if she wasn't the same person she had been in the beginning? The feeling of anxiety became impossible to ignore. All those nights when he heard her footsteps in the hallway, when her voice grew colder and colder, when she stopped being interested in his well-being, all of this became part of a bigger picture that he couldn't ignore. While he asked himself, why didn't I notice this earlier? Why did I let the situation deteriorate so much? And now, when he tries to make a decision, every step seems to come too late. John realized that he could not remain a passive observer. He decided he had to make a change. If not him, then who? He was old, but he still cared about what was going to happen to his life and his finances, which she seemed to be trying to take control of. Anna no longer looked as caring as she had in the beginning. There were moments in her behavior that he could not explain. And, although he felt the strength to act, even though he didn't know what the right thing to do was, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being stymied. He decided that he would take the situation into his own hands. But how? How could he trust his intuition when it could only be the delusions of an old man trying to find the enemy at every turn? John decided to find out more about the financial matters in which Anna was involved. He started checking the accounts that Anna had recently transferred from his retirement account. And while he was no expert in finance, the news he learned was no less stunning. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the large sums disappearing from his account. Someone was probably using his trust, and maybe even abusing it. Could Anna have been involved? John tried to find a logical explanation, but even the most reasonable theories seemed flawed. The feeling of fear that he might be deceived began to grow. As he analyzed the situation, he increasingly succumbed to the thought that it might be too late. The next day, John decided to talk to Anna directly. He was not relieved, and even the warm words he was about to say seemed hollow in his own mind. He felt that he could no longer trust her, and this feeling of anxiety became his companion. Anna came to his room, and as always her gaze was calm. John asked the question that had been tormenting him all these days. Anna, why are you transferring money from my accounts? What's going on? Anna didn't answer right away. She seemed surprised, even a little indignant at his question. But that was only on the surface. Her face became interested, and he saw her trying to find the words to explain. And her gaze became more nervous, and that was what he was looking for. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, trying to sound confident, but her hands shaking gave her away. John felt that the situation was getting out of hand. He could no longer hide his fear and frustration. He was no longer as nervous as he had been in the beginning, and he knew that certain things could not be just random. He made an important decision. He would go to the bank to check all the records to find out who exactly had access to his accounts. If Anna did not answer his questions, he would force her to do so. But how could he be sure he would know the truth? If this was her game, how would he know when she was going to hide everything from him? John sat in his favorite chair, looking at an old photo of his family. His father, mother, brothers, and sisters had all left him long ago. Now he was alone, and it was as if the whole world had turned against him. Could he have ever imagined that the one he trusted the most would become the main cause of anxiety? The pressure was increasing every day, not only from Anna, but also from himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing something wrong, that every step he took was another difficult choice between despair and hope. Every day brought new experiences, and although he tried to be strong, thoughts of how he could be left without support, and most importantly, without money, did not leave him. John began to feel his heart beat faster every time Anna got closer. She began to hide even more things, and he questioned her motives more and more. Her behavior became more and more suspicious. She seemed to be trying to maintain an appearance of serenity, but John realized that things were not that simple. His fears were taking on real forms. Every look at her made him feel like he had been cheated. And it wasn't just a money scam. It was something deeper. It was a betrayal of the very understanding someone actually cared about him. With each passing day, he realized that his chances of finding the truth were diminishing. And now, even questions that had seemed innocent before were becoming a kind of test. Was Anna really there for him, or was it just her role in the theater performance she was preparing for him? These thoughts were spinning in John's head so fast that he could no longer keep them under control. It seems that every day brings new discoveries that only increase the feeling of helplessness. How much more money will Anna take? Ooh, and how much time does he have left before she robs him of everything he owns? And worst of all, he didn't know how to stop it. Perhaps he had already trusted her too much to turn things around. But John couldn't just sit back and wait for it all to fall apart. He began to gather the remnants of his resolve. There was no one else he could trust. It was not a question of whether he would win or lose. It was a question of whether he would be left with something he once loved and lived for. With each passing day, the pressure on John began to mount. If not for his age and illnesses, he could have decided all of this on his own, but now he was limited. Just one step back and he would be at a dead end. He decided that the moment would come when he would tell Annie everything that was on his mind. He can't take this feeling of his life hanging in the balance any longer. What is she really doing with his money? Or is it not only the money, but also the respect he is losing for her that is hurting him so much? But at the same time, as hard as it was for him to realize, he was afraid of what might happen. No matter how much it hurts him, if he decides to find out the truth, it could be even worse than what he is already feeling. Opening that door could mean the end of his hopes. Everyone around John has tried to keep their role. Friends and acquaintances, even the doctors he talked to, could see his stress building, but it wasn't easy for him to ask for help. Afraid of looking weak and unwilling to question his own strength, John became increasingly isolated. Perhaps this was his mistake. He should not have been left alone with his feelings. But not everyone knows how to ask for help when they feel hopeless. Fearing that his problems would be perceived as weakness, John kept to himself. Instead of talking openly about his fears, he deepened his isolation. If only he could share his anxiety, if only someone understood how he felt. But what if the secrets he reveals cause him to lose more than money? What will he do if his life becomes a game in the wrong hands? John was on the verge of a big decision. Could he find a way out, or was his fate already sealed? John sat at the table with his hands on his head, and his every movement became heavy and measured, as if he were trying to put together the scattered pieces of a huge puzzle. There was anxiety in his eyes, but also determination. He could no longer live in the unknown. The time had come. He had to find out the truth, even if it meant witnessing his own catastrophic fall. For weeks, John searched for ways to gather some evidence of what was going on behind his back. He checked bank statements, correspondence, even watched Anna when she wasn't looking. It was horrible for him, but he had no other choice. The more he searched, the more he was convinced that his fears were justified. Keeping tabs on Anna was a challenge. At first, he just tried to keep a low profile, carefully observing her daily habits. How does she behave at home? Where does she go when she leaves? How often does she talk on the phone? And, most importantly, who is listening to her? One day, when she left her phone on the table, John heard a soft ring. He decided not to miss the chance. While Anna was in the kitchen, he instantly looked through the call history. And there it was, a number he had never seen before. He wrote it down on a piece of paper. Then he came across a line of messages where the words were clear. Tomorrow everything will be ready. You will receive your share. John could not believe his eyes. These findings were just the beginning. John acted quickly. With the help of his old second sister, who worked as an accountant, he gained access to some of the financial documents. But I knew that Anna handled most of the accounts. But what he discovered was frightening. The money coming out of his account had a specific destination. It went to new accounts, and then to suspicious companies. Each new transfer, each new transaction gave him more evidence that his suspicions were justified. John could feel his heart beating faster. Was this really what he was afraid of? Was Anna, with whom he had spent so many years, really stealing from him? It was hard to accept, but the facts were in front of him. Now he had the opportunity to confirm it, but with each piece of evidence he became more doubtful of her. He tried to talk to her, but as soon as he asked questions, Anna became defensive and aggressive. She immediately began to distract him, not giving him time to analyze the situation. Her answers became shorter and her gestures more nervous. John felt that she was trying to hide behind a mask of normalcy. With each new piece of evidence, John became afraid. He didn't have the courage to tell her the truth because he didn't know what it would entail. If he revealed all the cards, would it be the beginning of the end? She could ruin his life completely, or even worse, continue the deception until the end of his days. But he couldn't sit around and wait. John decided that he had to take action, even if it meant losing everything. If it turned out that he was wrong, it would be his greatest defeat. But if he was right, then there was only one question left. Would he be able to get out of the situation when everything was already on the verge of collapse? John felt that every step he took was pushing him further away from peace. The more evidence he found, the less he could trust even his own thoughts. He began to wonder if he had ever had a full life. Was it as he thought it was? Would this investigative path help solve everything? And wouldn't it be too late when he finally found out the truth? How much more is he willing to endure before he reveals all the cards? And, most importantly, what will happen when he realizes that the people closest to him have made up this whole story? John sat in his chair, deep in thought. Package of his life, which had once seemed so simple, was now a tangled maze of betrayal, manipulation, and uncertainty. Of the evidence he had gathered, the deep sense of betrayal, the internal struggle, all of it intertwined in his mind like several threads that seemed impossible to untangle. He felt the weight of every decision he faced. What to do? Reveal the whole truth and lose everything he had. Or turn a blind eye to the betrayal and try to save at least some of what he had left. Both options had their price, but John realized that by choosing one, he was losing the other. His heart beat faster as he thought about the fight. He could go all the way, gather all the evidence, file for divorce, demand justice. But was this the real justice he was looking for? Or was it just his fight against unknown enemies who were the ones he loved? Every day, every moment spent thinking left him with more and more doubts. His dignity required him not to give up, not to adapt, not to compromise. But what if the struggle would only lead to more pain and loss? With all the goals in mind, John still couldn't shake the feeling that he was unable to change the situation. If only it were that simple! He was ready to fight, but where would it lead? Even though he had the strength to go all the way, deep down he knew that if he did, he would be alone, without a home, without a family, without peace. His beloved home, where he and Anna had made their plans for the future, had now become a place where he felt like a stranger. And yet his sense of dignity was stronger. Could he afford to be weak? Could he leave his life and walk away with his head down from the betrayal? John often thought about this question as he sat in the kitchen drinking his coffee in the morning, when the whole house was still quiet. He remembered the moments when he was happy with Anna, when they laughed together, when they dreamed of the future. Those times seemed so far away, as if they had never happened. And was that time real, or was it just an ideal that existed in his head? The choice between dignity and struggle became a struggle with himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that he would have to sacrifice something important, even if he got what he was looking for. Remembering the moment he first met Anna, John realized that their relationship was built on promises. They had gone through many difficulties together, but it always seemed like they had a common goal. Were his feelings really an illusion, or was it just the result of their time together? Anna had always been an attractive and intelligent woman who seemed like the perfect partner. They often planned for the future together, talked about how they would grow old together, and how they would help each other in all their difficulties. And now everything seemed like an illusion. But the more John thought about it, the more he realized that the problem was not only with Anya. He was not a perfect husband either. He could be too busy with work, too closed off. Maybe that was why she had found other ways to find solace. Didn't all this go back to the beginning, when he didn't give her as much attention as she needed. Now it all snowballed, and John began to believe that his life was the result of his own mistakes. He felt like an unfortunate hero in his own tragedy. The choice between struggle and dignity became more and more difficult. The situation became more and more unpredictable. John realized that even after he tried to save his dignity, he would have to face even greater difficulties. How would he do it? What would he be left with after all the cards were revealed? And will he be able to rebuild his life at all? But the fight for his dignity was necessary for him. If he didn't fight now, would he ever be a man who was respected? What seemed like a difficult choice became John's most serious internal struggle. How do you act when you can't go back? How do you fight when you don't even know where to start? John realized that his choice now was not just about him. Destitute was a matter of dignity, and it would determine his future. What would he choose? And how would he resolve this struggle with himself? The next day for John began with a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time: relief. It was as if a heavy stone that had been pressing down on his chest for a long time had suddenly fallen off, allowing him to breathe deeply. Yesterday, he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, considering options for how to bring everything to light and whether he should go all the way. But today he felt that his choice finally mattered. The evidence he had been looking for and collecting for so long had become the key that opened the door to the truth. He sat at his desk, holding papers with all the facts, details, and documents. His heart was beating faster, because this small victory was the result of a great struggle. But, more importantly, he felt that it now gave him a chance to regain his dignity, no matter what the cost. John raised his eyes and looked out the window. The world around him seemed so familiar and ordinary, but for him, everything had changed. He now saw it not just as a routine, but as a whole list of possibilities. Today he felt the first relief was coming. He had made a difficult decision. Now he had to act. Despite the fact that his life had changed beyond recognition, John could not afford to relax. This relief was temporary, because he knew that the journey to regain all that he had lost was just beginning. And although he felt a little less burdened, it didn't mean that everything was resolved. His decision was the first step toward change. During his last conversation with his lawyer, he realized that he was indeed on the right track. But it was also clear that this was only a small part of what he had to go through. There were still unknown stages, how it would all happen, what price he would have to pay to regain control of his life. But it was all part of a bigger game. John realized that although he had received the first relief, the struggle to recover remained uncertain and difficult. At the same time, he realized that this first step would help him regain some of what he had lost. Meanwhile, John began to wonder why this relief was so important to him. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was more than that. It was the restoration of his inner stability. He began to feel not just like a victim of circumstance, but a person who could act. He no longer felt that his life was controlled by someone else. If John had not taken the courage to act, his life would have continued to be filled with fear and uncertainty. But thanks to his decision, he began to see that even at the bottom there is a path to recovery. With relief comes responsibility. John realized that he couldn't just rest on his laurels. He knew that he had to work harder to make things right. Even though this was just the first step in a long and difficult journey, he knew he couldn't afford to get complacent. He decided to act quickly. Now that he had all the evidence, he had to seize the day before the situation changed. He had a duty to bring to light all those responsible for what had happened. Moreover, he had a duty to protect himself from further manipulation. John was about to go to court to file all the paperwork. He suddenly realized that his best friend Liz had become an important part of this fight. She had always been his support, even when he didn't want her to be. Kea let him collect the documents, supported him every step of the way when he was hesitant. And now, when he was feeling the first relief, he had her support again. Her words that "You are worth more," were worth their weight in gold to him. The feeling that all was not lost, that there was someone who believed in you, strengthened his spirit. Liz became the person who helped him overcome the fear that had long dominated his life. He felt less alone in this struggle. John couldn't help but wonder how far he still had to go. The feeling of relief was good, but it did not mean victory. Now he had to take the next step that would determine the rest of his life. And it was not just a fight for being right, but for his future, for his dignity, and the right to a new life. With each step he took, John became more and more convinced that it was up to him to determine what his tomorrow would be like. And he was ready to do whatever it took to make it the life he deserved. John was sitting in his old chair, looking over the papers that had become second nature to him. And they were all on the table in front of him, as if visually reflecting all his frustrations, worries, and ultimately, attempts to find at least some justice. Now he realized that this path did not bring him what he had hoped for. Previous attempts had already been fatal. His plan, which he had been building for so long and hoping for a quick solution, now looked like one big failure. Each step John took seemed like a small piece of a puzzle that never seemed to fit together. His hopes and aspirations to bring everything to a logical conclusion were crushed by reality, and it was painful. John could not understand how everything went wrong. He had waited, planned, and even gained some temporary victories, but for some reason, everything remained in place. Liz's support kept him from feeling completely desperate, but it couldn't change what he felt inside either. Does he really believe in this fight? Would this journey end in success? There was no time to be sad. New challenges were already waiting ahead. The intervention of new elements in the case, including confusing and difficult legal obstacles, made him feel that the case was gaining momentum that he had not expected. John began to doubt the process itself. All these years he had trusted people, believed that the law and justice could be on his side, but now reality was showing him its uncompromising side again. He knew that the more he progressed, the more challenges he would face. Unknown conspiracies, attempts to confuse him even more, these were things he could not even think about at the very beginning of this story. However, John did not give up. He couldn't afford to give up now. It was not only a matter of monetary loss and truth, but also a matter of his self-respect. This new reality was more difficult than he could have ever imagined. John was forced to look at his opponents not just as enemies, but as multifaceted people operating in a system where things could not always be explained in black and white. More John studied the situation, the more he realized that he would have to fight not only the people who had harmed him, but also a system that seemed unbreakable and even hostile. He could feel his perception changing as he began to be more critical of all the laws he had been following. Is justice really on the side of righteousness? Patience, which John had lost so easily before, was now becoming his mainstay. He realized that he had to not only act, but also endure all these trials. Every new day brought him new challenges, and it seemed that not everything depended on him. One of the biggest problems was his inability to change the situation through purely legal channels. It was not only a question of proving the guilt of people who had cheated him, but also of figuring out how he could get any compensation in this system. As John began to delve deeper into this issue, he realized that even the best lawyers he had relied on had their limits. John knew that for him, this was going to be a fight for justice, not just material things. He not only wanted to get back what had been stolen, but also to restore his faith in himself, in the law, and in the ability to change something about his situation. But even the greatest desire for justice can result in new pain. John began to realize that some things just don't change, even when you fight to the last. This was a heavy blow to his worldview, but not completely. He gathered his strength and prepared for the next step. Moments of hopelessness came, and John felt as if he had nothing left. His hand, which he was reaching for his goal, was covered with wounds, but he could not stop. And all these trials took away his strength, but he continued because there was no other choice for him. He is already trying to pick up all the pieces of his hope, looking for the strength to move on. But every step is fraught with doubts, questions, and uncertainty. John sat in his usual place, staring at the emptiness in front of him. He was exhausted and overwhelmed with emotions, but he still lacked a final solution. All these months of struggle, doubt, and trial had brought him to a place where everything remained unclear. There were only questions in his mind that would not let him rest. His soul was silent, but his heart was beating hard, trying to make sense of everything. Not long ago, John felt that he could change his situation, but now, looking at all the papers, documents, and testimonies that had accumulated, he could not understand where he should go next. It was a struggle that was driving him up the wall without any specific goal. He spent all these months fighting for his justice, but was unable to achieve a final result. He felt lost in his own efforts. Was it all worth it? On the table in front of him was another stack of documents that did not bring him any clarity. He had already begun to realize that much of what had happened was in fact the result of not only criminal intent, but also of accidents. He couldn't decide which betrayed him more, the system that didn't allow him to get justice or his own expectations. John asked himself many times why this happened. Was it a real betrayal on the part of his guardian, or maybe it was his own naivety and desire to believe that human kindness could overcome any difficulties? He never received a definitive answer. Again, John was faced with a dilemma. Should he continue to fight or should he give up? He tried to understand whether it was worth staying in this game, where he had already lost so much. Each new step did not give him confidence, but only deepened his sense of hopelessness. He knew that losing this fight could mean losing his dignity, but was he ready to pay such a high price to maybe get his justice after all? Every day, his desire was increasingly replaced by doubts. Was it worth relying on people, on the system? Wasn't it all just an illusion that we were trying to create for ourselves? And then, on the verge of making the final decision, John remembered one thing. He had managed to achieve something important in this process, even if he didn't get what he was looking for. And he realized that the most important thing was how he had changed during this struggle. Sometimes the real victory lies not in the end result, but in the process itself, in gaining new insights in your own growth. John knew he couldn't leave everything he had been through just in the past. By continuing his struggle, he not only tried to find justice, but also discovered new opportunities for self-realization, although not in the way he had imagined. And now John was faced with the question of whether he really needed to continue the fight to the end, when all chances of victory looked doubtful. He realized that this was not just a story about money and lawsuits. And it was a story about his life, about what he had built over the years. And now all of this is caught in the grip of a system that does not guarantee justice at all. What to do next? How do you live in a world where even the most honest efforts can lead to disappointment? John did not have a clear answer. There was an emptiness in his heart, but also the clarity that he would not stop. He was ready to embrace this path in all its forms, even if the outcome was not what he had hoped for.